I sent one photo to our family group chat, my 7-year-old daughter pale and fragile after open-heart surgery. She wants to see you, I wrote. My brother texted back. Busy. Handle it. My mother added, she lived. Stop making her our problem. I replied. It is okay then, cried quietly by her bed. But at 11 at night, what my family saw broadcasted live on national television made them drop their champagne glasses and watch their billionaire empire burn to the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Hannah, and I am 32 years old. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile recovery room. My beautiful 7-year-old daughter, Lily, lay in the center of the oversized hospital bed. Her skin was translucent, her tiny chest wrapped in thick bandages after surviving a grueling 6-hour open-heart surgery. A rare congenital defect had turned our lives upside down, and today was supposed to be the day we finally breathed a sigh of relief. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I opened our family group chat. I snapped a picture of Lily holding her favorite stuffed bear, her eyes barely open but searching the room for familiar faces. I typed out a quick message. She is out of surgery. She is asking for you. She wants to see you. I waited, holding my breath. I watched the read receipts pop up almost instantly. Travis, my older brother, the golden child of the family, and a ruthless senior executive at Apex Care, read it first. His response came 30 seconds later. Busy. Handle it. I stared at the screen. The absolute coldness of his words physically knocked the wind out of me. Before I could even process his cruelty, another message popped up. It was from our mother, Brenda. She lived. Stop making her our problem. I swallowed the massive lump forming in my throat. My own mother, my own brother. They could not even spare 5 minutes to visit a 7-year-old girl who had just fought for her life. I forced my trembling fingers to type a response. It is okay. I put the phone face down on the small plastic tray table and let the tears fall. I cried silently, making sure my shoulders did not shake too much so I would not wake Lily. As a single mother working as a medical data auditor, I was used to carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I spent my days analyzing complex health insurance claims, finding discrepancies in billing codes, and ensuring data integrity. It was a solid, honest career, but to my family, I was an absolute failure. My parents, Thomas and Brenda, measured human worth entirely in dollar signs and social status. They had poured their entire life savings and retirement funds into Travis's company, Apex Care, a massive national health insurance corporation. Apex Care was going public this Friday. The upcoming initial public offering was all my family cared about. Travis was poised to become a billionaire, and my parents were riding his coattails to the upper echelons of extreme wealth. Needing a distraction from the crushing rejection, I picked my phone back up and opened social media. At the very top of my feed was a live video from Kiara, my sister-in-law. Kiara is an African-American woman who serves as the public relations director for Apex Care. She is obsessed with high society status designer labels and portraying the ultimate power couple image with Travis. In the video, Kiara was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald gown dripping in diamonds. She was panning her camera across a lavish ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and wealthy investors. It was the official pre-IPO gala celebrating Travis as the healthcare leader of the year. She turned the camera to herself, flashing a brilliant, rehearsed smile. "We are changing the future of healthcare tonight," she announced to her thousands of followers. Clinking a glass of champagne with a wealthy board member, I locked my phone screen. The contrast was nauseating. While my family drank vintage champagne and celebrated their impending fortune, I was sitting in a freezing hospital room, praying my daughter's heart would keep beating. They had actively chosen a networking party over their own flesh and blood. I wiped my face with a harsh paper towel from the dispenser. I told myself I did not need them. Lily and I had always survived on our own. We would get through this recovery just like we had gotten through everything else. Just as I managed to calm my breathing, the heavy wooden door to Lily's room creaked open. A hospital billing administrator walked in. She was a middle-aged woman with a tight, uncomfortable expression on her face. She held a thick manila folder clutched securely to her chest. "Miss Hannah." She started, her voice low and hesitant. "I am so sorry to disturb you right now, but we have an urgent administrative issue regarding Lily's procedure." I stood up immediately, moving away from Lily's bed, so we would not wake her. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Is there a problem with the insurance?" The administrator opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Yes, your insurance provider just sent over an emergency override. The claim for today's surgery has been denied." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That is impossible," I said, reaching for the paper. "We received pre-authorization 3 weeks ago. The pediatric cardiologist mandated this surgery to save her life. It was not elective. You cannot deny a life-saving procedure after it has already happened." The administrator looked down at her shoes. "I know, it is highly unusual. But the provider reversed the authorization an hour ago. The system flagged the surgery as experimental and unnecessary. They are refusing to cover the costs." My eyes scanned the heavy black text on the denial letter. "Total patient responsibility, $150,000. $150,000. The numbers blurred in front of my eyes. "I do not have that kind of money," I whispered, panic rising in my chest, like floodwater. "I am a single mother. I have health insurance for exactly this reason." I looked at the top corner of the document to see the name of the provider that had issued the denial. Apex Care. My heart stopped completely. Travis's company. As a medical data auditor, I knew exactly how these insurance systems worked. A post-operative denial of a previously authorized life-saving pediatric surgery did not happen by accident. It was not a glitch. A reversal of that magnitude required an executive override. Someone at the very top of the corporate ladder had to manually implement a sudden algorithm change to reject high-cost claims. My mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. Tomorrow was the end of the fiscal quarter. Friday was the highly anticipated initial public offering. To maximize the stock price and secure his billionaire status, Travis needed Apex Care's profit margins to look absolutely flawless. He needed to slash company expenditures at the last minute to show unprecedented revenue growth to his eager investors. Travis had deployed a system override to mass deny expensive medical claims. He had authorized an algorithm that branded my daughter's survival as experimental and unnecessary, just to pad his quarterly profit margins for the gala happening right this very second. "Are you absolutely certain there is no mistake?" I asked the administrator, my voice trembling with a mixture of profound terror and rising fury. "I am so sorry," she replied softly. "We tried to appeal the automated denial, but the corporate system immediately rejected our override. The hospital policy requires payment arrangements within 48 hours for uninsured major surgeries. If we cannot establish a payment plan, we will have to discharge Lily to a county facility once she is stable enough to be transported." A county facility. Those hospitals were dangerously underfunded and severely understaffed. Sending a fragile 7-year-old recovering from major open-heart surgery to a chaotic county ward was basically a death sentence. The risk of secondary infection alone would be catastrophic. I looked back at Lily. Her small chest rose and fell in a fragile, shallow rhythm. She looked so tiny, so innocent, completely oblivious to the fact that her own uncle had just put a price tag on her life and decided she was not worth the cost. "I will fix this," I promised the administrator, my voice dropping to a low and steady whisper. "Give me some time. I will somehow secure the remaining funds." I quickly left the hospital billing office with my heart pounding violently against my ribs. I had 48 hours to find $150,000. The drive from the sterile hospital parking garage to my parents' sprawling suburban estate was a massive blur of panic and pure adrenaline. I desperately tried to rationalize what was happening. How could a family willingly turn their backs on an innocent child? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. My parents lived in a heavily guarded gated community in the affluent hills outside the city, a highly exclusive neighborhood where the immaculate stone driveways were longer than my entire modest condominium. They had built their wealth through decades of careful saving, but recently they had liquidated nearly everything they owned. Thomas and Brenda had funneled their entire life savings and secure retirement accounts directly into Travis's company, Apex Care. They were banking entirely on the massive stock payout from Friday's highly anticipated initial public offering. I parked my rusted sedan directly behind my father's pristine luxury SUV. I did not want to be here. I had spent years maintaining a healthy distance from their toxic obsession with extreme wealth and social status. But my sweet 7-year-old daughter was currently lying in a hospital bed, one bureaucratic corporate threat away from being transferred to a dangerously underfunded county facility. Personal pride was a luxury I could no longer afford to keep. I took a deep, shaky breath, marched up the grand stone steps, and used my old spare key to unlock the heavy mahogany front door. I expected to find my parents sitting alone in the formal living room, perhaps watching the evening financial news. Instead, I walked right into a carefully orchestrated ambush. My parents were seated comfortably on their custom Italian leather sofa, casually sipping red wine. Standing near the massive marble fireplace was my younger sister Olivia, wearing a brand new designer dress she undoubtedly bought using our parents' credit card. Next to her stood her husband DeAndre. They had been married for 3 years, and during that time he had seamlessly integrated into my parents' toxic dynamic. Hai is an African-American man who serves as the senior branch manager at a prominent wealth management bank downtown. He is an absolute predator, in a perfectly tailored suit, a man who aggressively uses his financial authority to intimidate anyone he views as beneath his social standing. He was slowly swirling a glass of scotch, looking entirely too comfortable in my parents' home. They all stopped talking the moment I entered the room. "What are you doing here, Hannah?" my mother asked. Her tone was incredibly sharp, clearly irritated by my sudden, unannounced intrusion. She did not ask about Lily. She did not ask how the 6-hour open-heart surgery had gone. I ignored the sting of her absolute indifference and focused entirely on my father. "Dad, I need an emergency loan against the family trust," I said, keeping my voice urgent but remarkably steady. I hated asking for anything, but this was a matter of survival, not pride. Apex Care just denied Lily's surgical claim. They reversed the pre-authorization while she was in the recovery room. The hospital billing department is demanding $150,000 in cash within 48 hours, or they are discharging her to the county ward. "I will pay you back with interest. I just need you to co-sign a fast withdrawal from the emergency fund." My father let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. He set his crystal wine glass down on the glass coffee table and looked at me like I was a stranger asking for spare change on the street. "A loan," he repeated mockingly. "You want us to pull essential liquidity from the family trust 2 days before your brother's company officially goes public. Are you completely out of your mind?" My mother crossed her arms tightly across her chest. "We told you not to rely on that mediocre job of yours," she sneered. "You work as a medical data auditor. You spend your pathetic days looking at boring spreadsheets for pennies. If you had actually listened to us and gone into corporate law like Travis, you would not be standing here begging for a ridiculous handout right now. Travis is about to be a billionaire, Hannah. He is securing the financial legacy of this entire family. You are just trying to drag us down." "I am trying to save your granddaughter's life," I fired back, my voice rising in volume. My brother manually approved a denial algorithm to pad his quarterly profit margins. He is killing innocent kids to artificially inflate his stock price. Olivia scoffed loudly from her spot by the fireplace. "Oh, please. You are always so incredibly dramatic." She rolled her eyes dismissively. "Travis is an absolute business genius. You are just insanely jealous because your career is a complete joke and you cannot afford to take care of your own sick kid. Stop trying to make Travis look bad just because you are a massive failure." I took a furious step toward Olivia, but DeAndre stepped smoothly between us. He adjusted his highly expensive watch, a deeply condescending smirk spreading across his handsome face. "Actually, Hannah," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with false professional courtesy, You will not be making any withdrawals from the family trust today or ever. In fact, you will not be withdrawing anything from your personal emergency accounts either. I froze completely in my tracks. What exactly are you talking about? I demanded. DeAndre took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. He seemed to genuinely enjoy watching me squirm under the intense pressure of this nightmare. As the senior manager of the bank branch that holds all the family accounts, your father asked me to do a comprehensive risk assessment of our assets ahead of the IPO. Given your current financial instability and the massive medical debt you are about to incur, I quickly determined that you are a severe financial liability to this family. He smiled widely, showing his teeth. So I used my banking authority to officially freeze the emergency line of credit you share with Thomas and Brenda. The joint account is entirely locked down. You cannot access a single cent of that money. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I looked directly at my father, praying this was some sick, twisted joke. You let him freeze my emergency account, I asked, my voice trembling with shock. The account I have been personally paying into for 5 long years. It is strictly for the protection of the family assets, my father stated coldly, without a single ounce of remorse. We cannot have you draining our vital capital for a lost cause right before the biggest financial week of our entire lives. A lost cause. My own father had just referred to my sweet 7-year-old daughter, his own biological flesh and blood, as a lost cause. The extravagant rooms spun around me. The sheer terrifying depravity of what they were actively doing crashed over me like a tidal wave. DeAndre had maliciously weaponized his professional job to cut off my only remaining financial lifeline. My parents had fully endorsed his illegal actions just to protect their imaginary stock wealth. Olivia took a bold step forward, looking me up and down with utter unfiltered disgust. You have always been a pathetic leech, Hannah, she sneered loudly. You contribute absolutely nothing to this family. You just take and take. Well, the bank is officially closed. We are finally done subsidizing your bad life choices and your constant, exhausting drama. Go find someone else to guilt trip today. I stood silently and looked at the 4 of them. My mother with her cold, heavily calculating eyes. My father blatantly prioritizing paper wealth over a beating heart. My spoiled sister eagerly echoing their horrific cruelty. And DeAndre standing there acting like a smug, untouchable gatekeeper to my daughter's basic survival. They were not my family anymore. They were heartless monsters wearing human skin. I did not scream at them. I did not drop to my knees and beg for mercy. The frantic panic that had driven me to this house suddenly evaporated completely, replaced by a chilling, absolute mental clarity. I realized that arguing with them was a complete waste of breath. They had made their final choice. They had drawn a permanent line in the sand, and they had proudly placed dirty money on one side and my daughter's life on the other. I straightened my posture slowly. I looked DeAndre right in the eye, memorizing his arrogant expression, then turned my hardened gaze to my parents. I really hope the money is worth it, I said, my voice dropping to an eerie, unwavering calm. You traded your souls for a stock ticker, because you are going to need every single penny when the absolute truth comes out. I turned on my heel and walked straight out the front door. The heavy wood clicked firmly shut behind me, severing the toxic tie forever. I stepped out into the crisp, freezing night air, completely numb. I currently had 0 financial resources, illegally frozen accounts, and a daughter desperately fighting for her life in a hospital bed. But as I walked quickly back to my car, I was no longer feeling desperate or afraid. I was highly dangerous, and I was going to burn their entire empire down to the ground. The drive back to the hospital was a blur of neon streetlights and adrenaline. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury for people who had a safety net, and my family had just gleefully set mine on fire. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind operating with a cold, terrifying precision. DeAndre freezing my emergency accounts was supposed to break me. My parents backing his play was supposed to force me into submission. Instead, their betrayal had completely severed the emotional chains that had kept me playing the role of the dutiful, quiet daughter for my entire life. I parked my rusted sedan in the hospital garage and took the elevator up to the pediatric intensive care unit. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol hit me the moment the doors opened. I walked straight to Lily's room. She was still sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling beneath the heavy white bandages. The heart monitor beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. I stood by her bed and gently stroked her forehead. "I promised you I would fix this," I whispered to her sleeping form, "and I always keep my promises." I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and set it up on the small plastic tray table next to her bed. As a senior medical data auditor, my entire career revolved around dissecting complex healthcare billing systems, exposing fraudulent coding, and tracing digital paper trails that corporate executives desperately tried to hide. My family had spent the entire evening mocking my mediocre job, elevating Travis and his corporate lawyer status to godhood. They failed to realize that my supposedly pathetic career gave me the exact set of keys needed to dismantle their incoming billionaire fortune. I connected to the hospital's secure wireless network and logged into the provider portal. Because I frequently audited claims for regional hospital networks, I had high-level access credentials that allowed me to view raw billing data before it was processed by secondary insurance filters. I pulled up Lily's patient file. The massive red denial stamp glared back at me across the screen. Total patient responsibility, $150,000. I cracked my knuckles and went to work. I bypassed the standard user interface and opened the back-end coding terminal. Every insurance denial comes with a specific routing code that tells you exactly which department and often which specific executive authorized the rejection. I typed in a string of search commands sorting through thousands of lines of encrypted medical jargon to find the digital fingerprint attached to my daughter's denied open-heart surgery. The first thing I noticed was highly unusual. Standard high-cost surgical denials usually take days, sometimes weeks of manual review by a medical board before a final decision is issued. Lily's denial had been processed, reviewed, and finalized in less than 3 seconds. That speed was humanly impossible. It meant the rejection had not been reviewed by a doctor or a billing specialist. It had been triggered automatically. I dug deeper, my eyes scanning the glowing green text scrolling across my screen. I traced the routing code back to its point of origin. It led straight to a newly implemented server cluster at the Apex Care National Headquarters. Travis's direct domain. I hit a massive corporate firewall. A bold access denied message flashed across my screen warning me that the data was proprietary corporate property. A bitter smile crossed my face. Travis always relied on expensive software to do his dirty work, but he consistently underestimated the people who actually built and maintained those systems. I ran a diagnostic tool I had developed years ago, a backdoor bypass designed specifically to audit aggressive insurance firewalls without triggering internal security alarms. I waited for what felt like an eternity, listening to the rhythmic beeping of Lily's heart monitor as a loading bar slowly crept across my screen. With a soft click, the firewall crumbled. I was in. I was looking directly at the raw, unfiltered architecture of Apex Care's central claims processing system, and what I saw made the blood freeze completely in my veins. Travis had not just manually denied Lily's surgery to punish me. The reality was so much worse, so deeply sinister, that it took me a moment to fully process the sheer scale of the evil I was looking at. The system override was not an isolated incident. It was a massive, highly sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithm secretly deployed across the entire Apex Care National Network. I opened the algorithm's root directory. The code was specifically designed to target and automatically deny high-cost, life-saving procedures. But it was not targeting adults. It was exclusively targeting pediatric claims. Surgeries, oncology treatments, rare disease interventions for children. The algorithm was programmed to intercept these massive claims and instantly categorize them as experimental, effectively blocking any hospital from receiving payment and forcing families into immediate, crippling medical debt. I pulled up the national dashboard. Thousands of red dots populated across a map of the United States. Each dot represented a sick child who had just been handed a death sentence by a computer program. I clicked on a cluster of dots in Texas. Denied. A cluster in Florida. Denied. New York, California, Ohio. Denied, denied, denied. The sheer volume of the rejections was absolutely staggering. Travis and his executive team had effectively weaponized their own insurance infrastructure to slaughter children by proxy. I checked the implementation date. The algorithm had been quietly brought online exactly 3 weeks ago, right at the beginning of the final fiscal quarter before the initial public offering. The math clicked into place with horrifying clarity by automatically denying the most expensive pediatric claims nationwide. Apex Care was artificially slashing their operational expenditures by billions of dollars in record time. On paper, their revenue growth for this quarter looked absolutely miraculous. They were presenting themselves to Wall Street investors as the most profitable, efficient health insurance company in history. The stock price for Friday's IPO was going to open at an astronomical record-breaking high. Travis was literally building his billionaire empire on a massive graveyard of sick kids. He was inflating his company's value with blood money, and my parents had poured every single cent of their life savings and retirement funds directly into that exact same pool of blood. They had mocked me for being poor. They had allowed DeAndre to freeze my emergency accounts to protect their precious assets. They had turned a blind eye to their granddaughter's suffering because they believed Travis was a brilliant business genius who was securing their permanent generational wealth. They had no idea they were heavily invested in a massive illegal federal fraud scheme. I downloaded the entire raw dataset. Every line of code, every routing number, every single automated denial targeting a child. I copied the files onto an encrypted flash drive, watching the data transfer with a fierce, burning focus. This was not just about getting $150,000 to save Lily anymore. This was about dismantling an entire corrupt system and burying the people who had built it. I safely ejected the flash drive and slipped it deep into my pocket, just as the heavy door to Lily's hospital room swung open again. I quickly closed my laptop and turned around, expecting to see the hospital billing administrator returning to demand my immediate payment. Instead, I was looking straight at Kiara. My brother's wife stood in the doorway of the pediatric intensive care unit, looking like she had just stepped off a high-fashion runway. She was still wearing the same stunning emerald green designer gown I had seen on her live social media broadcast an hour ago. Heavy diamond earrings sparkled under the harsh fluorescent hospital lights. She looked wildly out of place among the sterile medical equipment and exhausted nurses. She did not look at Lily. Her eyes immediately locked onto me, cold and calculating. The public relations director of Apex Care had not come here at midnight in a ball gown to comfort her sick niece. She had come here to clean up a potential mess. I stood up slowly, blocking her view of my daughter's bed. "Hello, Kiara," I said, keeping my voice deadpan and flat. "You are missing your husband's big celebration. Did you get lost on the way to the VIP lounge?" She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her with a soft click. She gripped her expensive designer clutch tightly with both hands. "I do not have time for your usual bitter sarcasm, Hannah," she said, her tone brisk and entirely devoid of basic human empathy. "Travis told me about the insurance denial. We know the hospital is demanding a massive cash payment that you absolutely cannot afford right now." I crossed my arms. "You mean the denial your husband's illegal algorithm automatically generated?" I asked, watching her face closely. Kiara did not even flinch. She was a professional corporate spin doctor, completely numb to moral outrage. "I do not know anything about the technical side of the business," she stated smoothly. "I handle the public image, and right now the only thing that matters is ensuring that Apex Care maintains a flawless, pristine reputation heading into Friday's massive public offering. We cannot have the sister of the chief executive officer crying to the local news about a rejected pediatric claim. It is messy, it is a bad look, and Travis will not allow you to ruin the biggest financial week of our lives." She unclasped her designer bag and reached inside. She pulled out a crisp white envelope and walked forward, extending it toward me. I did not take it. "What is that?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It is a solution," she said, tossing the envelope onto my plastic tray table right next to my laptop. "Travis and I are offering you $5,000. Consider it a generous family donation to help you transport Lily to the county facility. But it comes with strict conditions." She pulled a secondary document from her bag. A thick, legally binding non-disclosure agreement. "You will sign this immediately," she commanded. You will agree to remain completely silent about your insurance denial. You will not post on social media. You will not speak to any journalists. If you try to smear Travis or his company before the stock goes public, we will absolutely destroy you. Travis will use his industry power to ensure you are blacklisted. You will never work as a medical data auditor again. You will be unemployed, homeless, and entirely bankrupt. I looked down at the $5,000 check sitting on the table. It was a pathetic, insulting bribe. I needed $150,000 to keep Lily out of the dangerous county ward. Kiara was offering me a fraction of a penny on the dollar to buy my permanent silence, while she stood there wearing diamonds that cost more than my daughter's entire surgery. The sheer audacity of her threat made a dark, dangerous energy rise up in my chest. I reached down and picked up the check. I held it between my fingers, feeling the crisp paper. "Is this really how you handle things, Kiara?" I asked quietly. "You buy off the victims of your husband's greed so you can keep playing pretend in high society." "It is called corporate survival," she shot back proudly. "Sign the paperwork, Hannah. Take the money and go quietly to the county ward. It is the absolute best deal you are ever going to get today." I stared at my sister-in-law, taking in her immaculate emerald green gown and the heavy diamond earrings catching the harsh hospital light. Kiara was a public relations director who had spent her entire adult life curating the perfect high society image. She cared about networking luxury brands and projecting absolute power. She did not care that my 7-year-old daughter was lying just a few feet away with a freshly bandaged chest. "You want me to sign a non-disclosure agreement," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You want me to legally gag myself so I cannot tell the local news that Apex Care is auto-denying life-saving pediatric surgeries right before your initial public offering." Kiara crossed her arms, her manicured nails tapping against her expensive clutch. "Do not play dumb with me, Hannah. Travis knows exactly how your mind works. You are a medical data auditor. You know how to read billing codes, and you know how to make a lot of noise if you feel wronged. We cannot have you running to journalists with some sob story about your sick kid. Investors hate bad press, and Friday is the most important day of our lives." I stepped away from the plastic tray table and moved closer to her. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "What if I take this insulting $5,000 check and post a picture of it online right now?" Kiara let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Then Travis will completely obliterate your entire life. Do you think a senior executive at the largest health insurance corporation in the country does not have industry connections? He will personally ensure you never work in medical auditing again. He will have your professional credentials revoked. You will be blacklisted across every hospital network and billing department in the United States. You will lose your condo, your car, and your ability to feed your daughter." She gestured vaguely toward Lily's bed without actually looking at her. "Take the $5,000. It is enough to cover an ambulance transfer to the county facility and maybe a few weeks of cheap groceries. Sign the paper, shut your mouth, and walk away. If you fight us, we will crush you into absolute dust." I looked down at the crisp paper check in my hand. $5,000. It was a fraction of what Travis made in a single afternoon. It was blood money, designed to silence a desperate mother while they built a billionaire empire on top of pediatric graves. My fingers tightened around the edges of the check. I thought about the thousands of other families across the country who were currently receiving the exact same automated denial letters. Families who did not have my specialized auditing skills. Families who would just accept their fate and watch their children suffer because they thought fighting a corporate giant was impossible. I looked right into Kiara's cold, calculating eyes. "You and Travis made one massive miscalculation today," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. Kiara raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" "You assumed I still had something left to lose," I replied. With a swift, fluid motion, I ripped the $5,000 check straight down the middle. Kiara gasped in genuine shock, taking a sudden step backward as her designer heels clicked loudly against the linoleum floor. I placed the torn halves together and ripped them again, tearing the paper into tiny, unrecognizable shreds. I opened my hand and let the pieces flutter to the ground, landing directly on the toes of her expensive shoes. "Are you completely insane? Kiara hissed, her voice trembling with raw, unfiltered fury. We just offered you a lifeline. We offered you a way out of total ruin. You offered me a bribe to look the other way. While my brother slaughters children for stock options, I fired back, stepping into her personal space. I am not taking your dirty money. I am not signing your gag order. And I am absolutely not transferring my daughter to a filthy county ward so you can drink champagne at your pre-IPO gala. Get out of my daughter's hospital room before I call security. Kiara's face twisted into an ugly, hateful sneer. You are going to severely regret doing that, Hannah. I promise you by tomorrow morning you will be begging us for that $5,000. She did not wait for my response. She spun around, yanked her designer smartphone out of her clutch, and aggressively dialed a number. She pushed the heavy wooden door open and stormed out into the hospital corridor. I followed her to the doorway, watching as she paced furiously down the hallway, speaking rapidly into her phone. I could not hear the exact words, but I saw the vicious, commanding gestures she was making. She was calling Travis. She was initiating the backup plan. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep, shaky breath. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached into my pocket and felt the hard plastic edge of the encrypted flash drive I had just downloaded. The drive contained every single line of code for the automated denial algorithm. It was the only weapon I had left, and I knew I had to use it carefully. Less than 20 minutes passed. The hospital ward was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitors. I was sitting beside Lily, gently stroking her fragile hand, when the door swung open again. It was not Kiara. It was the same hospital billing administrator from earlier, but this time she was accompanied by the chief medical officer of the pediatric wing. Both of them looked incredibly tense, their posture rigid and uncomfortable. Miss Hannah, the chief medical officer, began, his tone strictly professional, but laced with an underlying current of deep anxiety. We need to have a very serious discussion regarding Lily's immediate future at this facility. I stood up, shielding Lily's bed with my body. What did my brother do? I demanded, skipping the polite formalities. I know his wife just made a phone call. What did Travis threaten you with? The administrator exchanged a nervous glance with the doctor. We received an executive communication from the highest levels of Apex Care, she said, her voice shaking slightly. They have officially flagged Lily's file for suspected insurance fraud due to a conflict of interest regarding your employment as an auditor. Insurance fraud. I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. She is 7 years old. She just had open heart surgery. How could she possibly be flagged for fraud? It is an administrative hold, the doctor interjected quickly, attempting to de-escalate my rising panic. Because your brother is a senior executive at the provider company, and you refuse to sign their standard non-disclosure resolution, Apex Care has placed a total freeze on any further coverage negotiations. They are demanding an immediate full cash payment for the services rendered today. The administrator stepped forward, clutching a new clipboard. The directive was extremely clear, she said softly. The hospital cannot absorb a $150,000 loss, especially when the insurance provider is actively threatening to audit our entire network if we show you preferential treatment. Travis made it abundantly clear that if we do not enforce the payment policy, Apex Care will drop this hospital from their national coverage network entirely. My breath caught in my throat. Travis was using his massive corporate leverage to hold the entire hospital hostage. I was threatening to cut off insurance access for thousands of local patients just to force the administration to kick my daughter out into the street. The sheer terrifying magnitude of his cruelty was staggering. He was willing to destroy an entire community hospital just to silence his own sister. So what is the bottom line? I asked, my voice cracking despite my desperate attempts to stay strong. What are you telling me? The doctor looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. I am deeply sorry, Hannah, but our hands are completely tied. Due to the severe insurance complications, we are legally required to initiate a transfer protocol. Lily will be discharged from this intensive care unit and transported to the underfunded county medical facility within 48 hours. The only way to stop the transfer is if the $150,000 surgical balance is paid in cash in full before the absolute deadline arrives. I stared at the terrifying clipboard. My brother thought he had finally backed me into a corner. He thought threatening my child would force me to submit. He was completely wrong, because he did not realize that a mother fighting for her child's survival will burn down the entire world just to keep her safe. I would use his own algorithm to utterly destroy him. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone with the rhythmic beeping of Lily's heart monitor and the terrifying reality of a 48-hour deadline. I stared at the clinical clipboard resting on the plastic tray table. $150,000. That was the precise ransom my own brother had placed on my 7-year-old daughter's life. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic of the encrypted flash drive. The raw data, exposing the massive national fraud scheme, was safely in my possession, but exposing Travis to the federal authorities would take time. Time was the one resource I absolutely did not have. If I did not physically produce the cash by Thursday evening, hospital security would forcibly load Lily into an ambulance and ship her to a dangerously underfunded county ward. The risk of a fatal secondary infection in a facility like that was astronomically high. I needed liquid capital immediately. I walked over to the narrow window overlooking the hospital parking garage and stared out at the dark city skyline. My emergency savings were completely frozen thanks to my brother-in-law DeAndre and his malicious abuse of his banking authority. My credit cards were already maxed out from the previous years of managing Lily's specialized medical care. I had exactly one asset left in the entire world: my modest 2-bedroom condominium. I had spent 6 years diligently paying down that mortgage, building a safe, comfortable sanctuary for Lily and me. It was our only real home, but I knew without a single moment of hesitation that I had to sell it. Brick and mortar meant absolutely nothing compared to the steady beating of my daughter's heart. I opened my laptop and immediately started searching for emergency real estate investors, the aggressive corporate buyers who promised cash for homes within 24 hours. I filled out 4 different online intake forms detailing my property specifications and requesting an immediate cash buyout. Within 20 minutes, my phone began ringing. I stepped out into the quiet hospital corridor to take the calls, desperate for a miracle. The first real estate broker offered me a number so shockingly low it made my stomach drop. The second broker offered the exact same insulting figure. The third broker was even worse, citing sudden market instability in my specific zip code. My condo was easily appraised at $300,000, and I held about $200,000 in pure equity. Yet every single aggressive buyer I spoke to refused to offer anything over $90,000 in cash. It made absolutely no logical sense. The local housing market was booming, not crashing. I was a medical data auditor, trained to spot numerical discrepancies, and the identical predatory lowball offers immediately triggered every single professional instinct I possessed. Something was manipulating the data behind the scenes. Before I could log back into my laptop to investigate the strange housing valuations, the elevator doors at the end of the intensive care unit slid open. I watched in utter disbelief as my younger sister, Olivia, stepped out onto the sterile linoleum floor. Right beside her was her husband, DeAndre, looking incredibly sharp in a tailored navy blue suit. They did not look like concerned family members rushing to check on a sick child. They looked like predatory vultures circling a fresh carcass. Olivia strutted down the hallway wearing a massive, self-satisfied smirk. She did not even glance at the heavy glass door leading to Lily's recovery room. "Well, Hannah," Olivia said loudly, her voice echoing down the quiet corridor. "Word travels fast in this family." Mom called me in a total panic. She said Kiara told Travis you were officially broke and that the hospital administration gave you a strict 48-hour eviction notice. It sounds like your stubborn pride finally caught up with you. I crossed my arms tightly across my chest, refusing to let them see my mounting panic. "Why are you here, Olivia?" I asked coldly. "Did you come to gloat? Or did you just want to make sure the hospital actually kicks your niece out onto the street?" DeAndre stepped forward, sliding his hands smoothly into his expensive trouser pockets. "Now, there is no need for all this hostility," he said, his deep voice dripping with false concern. "We are family. And despite the terrible things you said to Thomas and Brenda earlier tonight, Olivia and I actually came here to offer you a generous lifeline. We know you are completely desperate for cash to stop the medical transfer. We also know your emergency accounts are entirely locked down, so we want to help you out of this massive financial hole. I narrowed my eyes, staring directly at his arrogant face. You want to help me? I repeated skeptically. You are the bank manager who illegally froze my accounts just to protect Travis's stock options. Why would you ever help me? Olivia sighed, dramatically flipping her hair over her shoulder. Because we are actually good people, unlike you, she sneered. DeAndre and I are willing to buy your condominium today. We brought the official transfer paperwork with us. We will give you a cashier's check for $90,000 right here in this hallway. You sign the deed over to us, and you can instantly pay the hospital administration before the deadline expires. It is a win for everyone. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. $90,000. It was the exact same highly specific insulting number the aggressive corporate buyers had just offered me over the phone. You want to buy my home for 30% of its actual market value? I asked, my voice rising with sheer incredulity. You are trying to steal my entire property equity while my daughter is lying in a hospital bed. It is called a distressed asset sale, Hannah DeAndre stated smoothly, utilizing his condescending banking jargon to justify his blatant robbery. You need liquid capital in less than 48 hours. You do not have the luxury of waiting for a traditional real estate closing. $90,000 is a highly competitive offer for a motivated seller in a crisis. Take the money, save your kid, and go rent a cheap apartment somewhere else. I stared at the two of them. They were not offering a lifeline. They were executing a highly coordinated financial execution. DeAndre was an African-American wealth manager who had spent his entire career identifying and exploiting vulnerable clients, but leveraging that predatory tactic against his own sister-in-law was a new level of depravity. I looked at the thick legal envelope in his hand and then back up to his smug eyes. You want to steal my house, flip it for a massive profit, and use my equity to buy more shares of Apex Care before Friday's initial public offering. I said, the horrifying realization clicking into place. You are trying to profit off my daughter's medical emergency. Olivia laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You really are paranoid, Hannah. We are giving you a massive cash bailout. If you want to be ungrateful and let Lily get shipped off to a filthy county clinic, that is your choice. But this offer expires the second we walk out of this hospital. Get out. I commanded, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. I am not signing over my home to you. I will find another way. DeAndre let out a dark, mocking chuckle. Good luck with that, he said, turning toward the elevator. No legitimate broker in this city is going to offer you a single penny more than we just did. Your financial profile is an absolute toxic wasteland. Let us go, Olivia. We tried our best. I watched them walk away, their laughter echoing down the hallway. DeAndre's final words bounced around inside my head. Your financial profile is an absolute toxic wasteland. That specific phrasing bothered me. My credit score was perfect. I never missed a mortgage payment. I paid all of Lily's previous medical bills on time. There was absolutely no reason for my financial profile to be toxic unless someone had actively tampered with it. I rushed back into Lily's room. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. As an auditor, I had access to deep financial verification databases. I pulled up my credit report and scrutinized the data logs. The screen revealed a massive data breach. DeAndre had maliciously used his banking clearance to access my files. He flagged my profile to local real estate brokers as a distressed asset, artificially tanking my property value. They were trying to steal my home, flip it, and use my equity to buy more Apex Care stock before the IPO. The sheer depravity of my family was now fully unmasked. They were willing to let my daughter die to inflate their corporate wealth. They made a fatal mistake. My desperation transformed into pure rage. I secured the encrypted flash drive in my pocket, asked the charge nurse to watch Lily, and explicitly banned all family members from her room. Kiara had broadcasted their location online. They were hosting a private dinner in a high-end French restaurant downtown, toasting to tomorrow's massive stock market launch. I drove through the dark city streets with a terrifying sense of calm. The frantic mother who had begged for a loan earlier tonight was dead. The woman gripping the steering wheel was a highly trained auditor who had just caught a ring of corporate criminals red-handed. I ignored the restaurant hostess and marched straight toward the private dining suites in the back. I shoved the heavy oak double doors open with enough force that they slammed loudly against the expensive wallpaper. The entire table froze. My parents, Thomas and Brenda, sat at the head clinking expensive champagne. Travis sat looking smug in a custom tuxedo Kiara draped over his arm. Across from them sat Olivia and DeAndre wearing the exact same clothes they wore to the hospital an hour ago when they tried to steal my home. The contrast between their lavish caviar celebration and my daughter's sterile room fueled my fire. "What are you doing here?" Travis demanded, standing up. "This is a private celebration." I ignored him and walked straight toward DeAndre. The predatory smile he wore at the hospital vanished. I pulled my printed credit report from my bag and threw it directly into his plate of oysters. "You are sloppy, DeAndre," I said, my voice echoing loudly. "You used official bank clearance to illegally access my financial data. You flagged my profile as a distressed asset and distributed that false information to real estate brokers to artificially crash my property value. You tried to orchestrate a predatory buyout of my home for 30% of its market value just so you and Olivia could flip it for Apex Care stock before the opening bell." DeAndre shifted uncomfortably. Thomas frowned, setting his champagne down. "Hannah, stop making wild accusations," my father ordered. "DeAndre is a respected bank manager offering a generous bailout. It is a federal crime," I stated flatly. "Unauthorized access to consumer credit data carries massive prison sentences. I already forwarded the digital access logs to a secure server. Your banking career is over." Olivia jumped up. "You are a liar," she shrieked. "You are furious because you are completely broke and we are about to be rich. DeAndre was trying to help you." "Help me?" I turned my focus to Travis. "Just like Travis helped Lily." Travis let out an exasperated sigh and rolled his eyes. "I do not have time for your emotional outburst today, Hannah. Kiara already offered you $5,000 to go quietly to the county ward. You should have taken the money and kept your mouth shut." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the encrypted flash drive, holding it up for the entire table to see. "I did not take the bribe because I was busy auditing your hospital network's back-end billing portal," I said, watching the color instantly drain from Kiara's face. "I bypassed your corporate firewalls. I found the origin code for Lily's surgical denial." The room went completely silent. Travis stopped moving. "It was not a manual override," I continued, my voice steady and commanding. "You deployed a highly sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithm across the entire Apex Care national network. You programmed the system to automatically deny high-cost pediatric surgeries. You are deliberately intercepting life-saving claims for children and branding them as experimental to instantly block payments. You artificially slashed your operational expenditures by billions of dollars in less than 3 weeks just to inflate your quarterly profit margins and boost tomorrow's stock price." My parents stared at me, their mouths slightly open. I waited for the horror to wash over their faces. I waited for them to express absolute disgust that their golden boy was building his billionaire fortune by denying healthcare to dying children, including their own granddaughter. I waited for them to turn on him. Instead, my mother scoffed. "Is that what this is about?" Brenda asked, rolling her eyes and reaching for her wine glass. "You stormed into our private celebration to complain about corporate software." I stared at her, genuinely unable to comprehend her reaction. "Mom, did you hear a single word I just said?" I asked, my voice cracking for the very first time. "He is killing children. He is denying them surgeries to make money. He did it to Lily. Your entire retirement fund is tied to a company that profits from dead kids." "It is standard business practice," my father interjected smoothly, defending his son without a second thought. "Travis has a fiduciary duty to maximize value for his shareholders. Insurance companies deny claims all the time. It is exactly how the industry works. You are just being overly sensitive because your daughter happens to be on the receiving end of a routine cost-cutting measure." I felt physically sick. Routine cost-cutting measure. They knew exactly what Travis was doing and they did not care. They actually supported it. Travis laughed aloud, a cruel, echoing sound that filled the VIP suite. He adjusted his expensive cufflinks and looked at me with absolute contempt. The corporate world is about survival of the fittest, Hannah, he stated proudly. I built a highly efficient financial machine. If your kid is too expensive to keep alive, that is your personal failure, not my corporate responsibility. You should have planned better. Now get out of my dinner before I have you arrested for corporate espionage. The sheer depravity of his statement hung in the air. I looked at Kiara, who was nodding in agreement. I looked at Olivia and DeAndre, who were smirking at my distress. And finally, I looked at my parents, the people who had raised me, the people who were supposed to love me and my daughter. Brenda stood up, her face twisted in pure rage. She walked around the large dining table and marched directly up to me. "You are a jealous, toxic failure," my mother screamed, spit flying from her lips. "You have always resented Travis because he is brilliant and successful, while you waste your life auditing spreadsheets. You came here tonight specifically to ruin his success because you are bitter and pathetic. You are trying to destroy this family. You destroyed this family the second you chose money over Lily's life," I fired back. The resounding crack echoed sharply through the room. My father Thomas had stepped up right behind my mother and slapped me violently across the face. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side. A sharp, stinging pain radiated across my left cheek, and I tasted copper as my teeth cut into the inside of my lip. "Never speak to your mother that way again," Thomas snarled, his face red with unhinged fury. "You are a disgrace to this family. You are cut off entirely. Do not ever ask us for anything again." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The entire table watched me, waiting for me to break down. They expected me to fall to my knees, crying and begging for their forgiveness. They expected the slap to put me back in my designated place as the weak, subservient scapegoat of the family. I slowly turned my head back to face my father. I did not raise my hand to touch my stinging cheek. I did not shed a single tear. The searing pain only solidified the icy clarity taking over my entire mind. The last invisible thread tying me to these monsters snapped completely, leaving nothing but cold, calculated resolve in its wake. I stared at them with a terrifyingly calm expression. I looked at the extravagant food on the table, the expensive champagne, the designer clothes, and the greedy, twisted faces of the people I once called my family. "You chose paper wealth over my daughter's life," I told them, my voice ringing out with absolute chilling certainty. "Keep your money." I turned my back on them and walked out of the private dining room. I did not rush. I did not look back. I strode through the restaurant with my head held high, leaving the heavy oak doors wide open behind me. The physical sting on my face faded, replaced by the heavy weight of the flash drive in my pocket. They thought they had won. They thought their money made them invincible. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew the war had just begun. I walked down the dark sidewalk, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear or from the freezing cold, but from the massive, overwhelming realization that I was finally taking ultimate control. The counterattack begins now. I drove back to the hospital, my mind racing with a singular focus. Mourning my family was over. I parked my rusted sedan in the darkest corner of the hospital garage and took the service elevator up to the pediatric intensive care unit. I checked on Lily first. She was still sleeping soundly, the cardiac monitors maintaining their steady, reassuring rhythm. The charge nurse gave me a sympathetic nod, unaware of the corporate execution order hanging over my daughter. I kissed Lily on the forehead, promising her again that I would protect her. Then I grabbed my laptop bag and headed down to the hospital cafeteria. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The cafeteria was deserted, illuminated only by the harsh glare of fluorescent overhead lights and the hum of vending machines. I chose a small table in the very back corner, completely shielded from the security cameras. I pulled out my laptop and set the encrypted flash drive on the table. This piece of plastic held the key to Travis and his billionaire empire. It held the raw, undeniable proof that Apex Care was actively slaughtering children to inflate their stock price. I plugged the drive into my computer. As a medical data auditor, I knew exactly how ruthless corporate cybersecurity teams operated. Travis would undoubtedly have his IT department monitoring the network for any unauthorized data extraction. If I logged into my personal email or used a standard connection to transfer these files, they would flag my location, lock down my devices, and potentially send corporate security to intercept me before I reached the authorities. I had to be completely invisible. I opened my terminal and began overriding the hospital network settings. I bypassed their standard virtual private network and built a multi-layered encrypted proxy tunnel using remote servers I had established years ago for secure auditing tasks. I masked my internet protocol address, bouncing my connection through secure nodes in Europe and South America. To Apex Care, I would look like a phantom glitch in the system. With my connection secured, I started compiling the raw data. I organized the thousands of automated denial codes into a clear, devastating visual dashboard. I highlighted the specific algorithm directives Travis had manually signed off on. I mapped out the exact timeline showing how the pediatric rejections directly correlated with Apex Care, slashing their operational expenditures right before Friday's public offering. The data told a perfect, horrifying story of premeditated corporate murder. But compiling the evidence was only the first step. I needed someone on the inside of the federal government, someone with enough jurisdiction and power to bypass local authorities who might easily be bought off by Travis and his corporate lawyers. I needed a federal strike. I opened a secure encrypted messaging application and typed in a phone number I had memorized a decade ago. It belonged to an old college connection named Ryan. While I had gone into medical data auditing, Ryan had pursued law. He was a highly respected federal prosecutor working directly for the Department of Justice, specializing entirely in national healthcare fraud. We had not spoken in 5 years, but I knew he was the only person I could trust with this explosive evidence. I typed a short, urgent message. Ryan, it is Hannah. I have definitive raw proof of a multi-billion-dollar pediatric fraud scheme orchestrated by the executive board of Apex Care. They are automatically denying life-saving surgeries to pad their IPO. I need federal intervention immediately. My daughter's life is on the line. I hit send and waited. The seconds stretched into minutes. The silence of the cafeteria felt deafening. I watched the encrypted chat window, my heart hammering against my ribs. 3 minutes later, a reply popped up on my screen. Where are you? I sent him the address of the hospital and told him I was in the basement cafeteria. His response was immediate. Do not move. Do not connect to any other networks. I am bringing a federal cybercrimes unit. I will be there in 20 minutes. I closed my laptop and waited in the harsh artificial light. The physical pain in my cheek from where my father had slapped me was completely gone. I felt nothing but a cold, driving anticipation. 22 minutes later, the heavy cafeteria doors swung open. Ryan walked in wearing a dark trench coat over a sharp suit. He was accompanied by two serious-looking men holding encrypted federal laptops. Ryan spotted me in the corner and hurried over. He looked exactly the same as he did in college, just sharper, hardened by years of prosecuting corrupt medical executives. Hannah, he said, his voice low and urgent, as he pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Tell me exactly what you have. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. I walked him and his federal agents through the data. I showed them the root directory of the automated denial algorithm. I pointed out the specific executive routing codes, tying the system directly to Travis. I showed them the national dashboard I had compiled, highlighting the thousands of pediatric surgeries that had been illegally rejected in the past 3 weeks, just to inflate the company's financial valuation before Friday. Ryan stared at the screen, his jaw tight. The two federal agents behind him began rapidly typing into their own devices, verifying the data architecture I was presenting. The silence in the room was thick with absolute shock. Even seasoned federal prosecutors were completely stunned by the sheer unadulterated evil of Travis's corporate strategy. This is not just insurance fraud, Ryan said, his voice dropping to a harsh, disgusted whisper. This is a massive, coordinated criminal conspiracy. They are artificially inflating their stock price by systematically denying critical care to minors. The casualty rate alone would trigger a massive federal indictment. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with realization. Your brother orchestrated this. Yes, I stated firmly, my voice unwavering. He implemented the algorithm. His public relations director wife is currently burying the negative press. My brother-in-law, a wealth management banker, is actively freezing my personal accounts and attempting to illegally buy my property at a predatory discount to funnel my equity into their IPO stock. My parents are funding the entire operation with their retirement accounts. They are all complicit. Ryan let out a sharp breath. He looked at the two agents. Can we verify the corporate signatures on the root code? One of the agents nodded affirmatively. The data is pristine. She bypassed their firewalls cleanly. The digital fingerprints lead directly to the Apex Care executive boardroom. We have enough raw evidence right here to secure federal warrants for the entire C-suite. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the encrypted flash drive, and placed it firmly on the table in front of Ryan. This is the master file, I told him. It contains every single automated denied medical review and the exact financial projections they are using to defraud their Wall Street investors tomorrow. I want them all in federal prison. Ryan picked up the flash drive with careful precision. You understand what happens next, Hannah? He asked, looking at me with deep professional respect. Once I take this into federal custody, there is no going back. Apex Care will collapse. Your family will face severe criminal charges. They will lose absolutely everything. I looked him dead in the eye. They chose to sacrifice my daughter for a stock ticker, I replied coldly. I want you to burn their empire to the ground. Ryan nodded slowly. He signaled to the agents who immediately secured my laptop and the flash drive into locked federal evidence bags. Consider it done. But right now, we need to protect you and your daughter. By handing over this evidence, you just became the most valuable witness in the biggest healthcare fraud case in modern history. He pulled a thick official document from his briefcase and slid it across the table. This places you under immediate federal whistleblower protection, he explained. It grants you full legal immunity from any corporate retaliation. But more importantly, for your current situation, it triggers a massive federal injunction. Under the Whistleblower Protection Act, any medical facility actively treating a federal witness or their immediate dependents is legally barred from denying service, demanding immediate cash payment, or initiating a medical transfer without federal authorization. A massive wave of relief crashed over my entire body. I stared at the federal document. The crushing, suffocating weight of the $150,000 medical bill evaporated in a single second. Travis's threat was completely neutralized. Ryan stood up and quickly pulled out his mobile phone. I am calling the hospital administration right now, he stated. The eviction order is permanently canceled. Lily is safe. My toxic family was finally doomed. The next 48 hours passed in a state of absolute peace. For the first time since my sweet daughter collapsed, I actually slept. Knowing Ryan and his federal cybercrimes unit were quietly building the most devastating criminal case in modern healthcare history allowed me to finally breathe. By the time Friday morning arrived, the entire country was buzzing with financial anticipation. Today was the official day of the Apex Care initial public offering. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Lily's hospital bed and turned on the television inside our sterile hospital room. I muted the volume, but I did not need to hear the breathless financial commentators to know exactly what was happening. The bottom ticker on the news network was flashing bright green, signaling a massive surge in pre-market trading. Travis had successfully pulled off his horrific scheme. By artificially slashing operational expenditures through his illegal pediatric denial algorithm, he had presented Wall Street with a completely fraudulent portrait of unprecedented corporate efficiency. On the muted screen, the live broadcast shifted to the bustling floor of the stock exchange. There he was, my older brother Travis, standing proudly looking down. I was standing on this prominent balcony overlooking a sea of frantic traders. He was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue suit, his hair perfectly styled, his teeth gleaming in the bright camera lights. He looked like the absolute epitome of corporate success. He raised his hands, waving to the cheering crowd below. Standing right beside him was Kiara, his African-American wife, and the public relations director who had threatened to destroy my life just 2 nights ago. She was wearing a blindingly expensive white designer dress, her wrists and neck dripping with heavy diamonds that caught the lights. She looked directly into a camera and smiled widely, playing the role of the devoted, brilliant executive wife to absolute perfection. The countdown clock on the television screen ticked down to 0. Travis grabbed the heavy wooden mallet and struck the ceremonial opening bell. The crowd on the trading floor erupted into chaotic cheers. Confetti rained down from the ceiling. The Apex Care stock officially opened for public trading, and within seconds, the initial share price skyrocketed. The graph on the screen climbed at a nearly vertical angle. In that exact moment, my brother officially became a certified billionaire on paper. The financial commentators on the screen were visibly ecstatic, their mouths moving rapidly as they praised his aggressive business strategies and his visionary leadership. They had absolutely no idea that his visionary leadership consisted of signing automated death warrants for innocent children across the country. My phone sitting on the plastic tray table next to my laptop immediately began to vibrate. It buzzed once, twice, and then erupted into a continuous frantic rhythm. I picked it up and unlocked the screen. The family group chat was exploding with a massive barrage of messages. My mother Brenda was the very first. She sent a picture of herself and my father Thomas, holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne in what looked like a lavish penthouse suite. They were surrounded by catered food and expensive floral arrangements. Her text read, "We just multiplied our retirement fund by 10 in less than 5 minutes. Travis is a generational genius. This is what true success looks like. We are officially untouchable." My younger sister Olivia immediately chimed in. She sent a selfie showing off a brand new, oversized diamond tennis bracelet. "DeAndre just bought this for me to celebrate," she typed, adding small champagne emojis. "He is currently on a private call with his banking executives, managing his new stock portfolio. We are moving out of our neighborhood next week and buying a massive estate in the hills. Too bad our ugly duckling dropout sister could not be here. She could have actually learned something about real wealth instead of begging for our spare change." Kiara sent a video message directly to the group chat. She was standing in the VIP lounge of the stock exchange, laughing loudly as Travis popped another bottle of champagne behind her. She looked at her phone camera very maliciously. "I wonder how the county hospital is treating our favorite failure this morning," she mocked, her voice dripping with venom. "Probably serving stale gelatin and cheap juice. It is truly a shame some people just do not know how to survive in the real world." I read every single message. I read their cruel jokes, their arrogant boasting, and their relentless, disgusting greed. 3 days ago, those text messages would have shattered my heart into a million tiny pieces. 3 days ago, their coordinated rejection would have sent me spiraling into a deep, dark panic. But sitting right there today, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, profound pity for them. They were getting drunk on champagne and celebrating a fraudulent fortune that was about to vanish into thin air. They were blindly dancing on the edge of a massive federal cliff, completely unaware that I had already pushed the detonator. I did not reply to a single message. I did not block their numbers or exit the group chat. I simply reached over and flipped the small switch on the side of my phone, silencing the device completely. I placed it face down on the tray table entirely nearby. I turned my attention back to the only thing in the entire world that actually mattered. My sweet daughter was finally waking up. Lily blinked her large, sleepy eyes and let out a soft, tired yawn. The heavy cardiac bandages on her chest looked stark white against her pale skin, but there was a faint, healthy flush of pink returning to her cheeks. "Good morning, my brave girl," I whispered softly, leaning over the metal bed rails to gently kiss her warm forehead. "How are you feeling today?" Lily offered a small, groggy smile. "My chest hurts just a bit." "It hurts a little bit, Mommy," she murmured, her voice raspy from the breathing tube they had removed yesterday. "But I feel better. I am not as tired." I smoothed her soft hair back from her face, my heart swelling with an overwhelming, unconditional love. "I know it hurts, sweetheart," I told her, holding her tiny hand in mine. "But your heart is fixed now. It is strong and healthy, and you are going to get better every single day. The doctor said you are doing incredibly well." I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled something nice out. I pulled out a small, colorful canvas pouch. I unzipped it and laid out 5 different bottles of bright, cheerful nail polish on her tray table. I promised you a spa day when you woke up, I said, forcing a bright, enthusiastic smile onto my face. We have glittery pink, ocean blue sunshine, yellow, bright purple, and neon green. Which color do you want today? Lily's eyes lit up with genuine excitement, completely eclipsing the sterile, frightening environment of the intensive care unit. I want the ocean blue with the glittery pink on top, she decided, pointing very quickly there. I pulled up my plastic chair, unscrewed the tiny brush, and began carefully painting her small fingernails. The hospital room was incredibly quiet, insulated from the chaotic, greedy world outside by the thick walls and the heavy wooden door. The federal whistleblower protection order Ryan had filed was working perfectly. No billing administrators came to harass us. No corporate security guards tried to force an illegal medical transfer. The hospital staff treated us with the utmost respect and care, completely unaware of the federal mandate protecting our presence. For the first time in months, I felt completely and entirely safe. As I painted the sparkling pink topcoat over the bright blue polish, I reflected on the massive, glaring juxtaposition between my reality and my family's current situation. They were currently standing in a lavish New York penthouse suite, high on stolen money and completely consumed by their own shallow vanity. They measured their entire worth by the balance in their offshore bank accounts and the designer labels draped across their shoulders. They had eagerly sacrificed my daughter's basic survival just to maintain their illusion of elite superiority. They were utterly hollow, empty people who would gladly betray their very own. I, on the other hand, was sitting in a standard hospital chair holding my living, breathing child. I had no access to my emergency savings, no grand estate waiting for me in the hills, and no billionaire status. But as I watched Lily admire her freshly painted, sparkling nails, I realized that I possessed a kind of wealth my family would never understand. I had a clear conscience. I read her favorite storybook, silently waiting, while the federal gears turned entirely behind the scenes. The hospital room was a sanctuary of quiet, rhythmic sounds. The steady beep of the cardiac monitor was a beautiful lullaby, proving that my daughter was alive and safe. I had pulled a soft blanket over Lily, tucking it under her chin as her breathing deepened into a restful sleep. The heavy dose of post-operative medication was finally giving her tiny body the rest it desperately needed to heal. I sat back in the stiff plastic chair, the kind of chair designed to keep anxious parents awake. But tonight I felt no anxiety. I felt a cold, absolute certainty. The digital clock on the wall above the television read 10:40. I knew exactly what was happening across the city. Ryan and his federal cybercrimes unit had spent the entire day quietly securing warrants from a federal judge. They had moved with terrifying invisible efficiency, coordinating a multi-agency strike team, while my brother Travis paraded around the stock exchange floor. Travis believed he was the untouchable king of the financial world. He had spent his evening rubbing elbows with Wall Street elites, soaking up the praise and the limitless champagne, completely oblivious to the massive federal net that had just been pulled tight around his entire empire. My phone lay face up on the small tray table next to my laptop. I had silenced the notifications earlier, but the screen suddenly flared to life, illuminating the dark hospital room with a harsh, artificial glow. It was 10:45 exactly. The family group chat was active again. I watched the preview bubbles pop up on the locked screen. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I knew whatever they were sending would be dripping with venom and attempt to twist the knife while they thought I was at my absolute lowest point. But the old, vulnerable Hannah was gone. I picked up the phone and opened the chat. The first new message was a high-resolution photograph from my younger sister, Olivia. She was standing in the center of a massive, opulent penthouse suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The room was decorated with towering arrangements of white orchids and silver balloons, spelling out the name of Travis's company. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, the sparkling skyline of the city looked like a glittering prize they had just claimed. Olivia was holding up a bottle of champagne that I recognized from my days working at a high-end restaurant during college. It was a $500 bottle, and there were at least a dozen more empty ones scattered across the marble tables behind her. She was wearing a smirk that mirrored the one she wore when DeAndre tried to steal my condominium. Her text message below the photo read, "Toasting to the best day of our lives. DeAndre just wired the down payment for our new mansion. We are drinking the good stuff tonight." My mother Brenda immediately replied to Olivia's photo. She sent a string of clapping emojis, followed by a message that perfectly encapsulated her lifelong emotional abuse. "Too bad our ugly duckling dropout could not be here tonight." Brenda typed her words deliberately chosen to inflict maximum psychological damage. She could have actually learned something about real success, instead of dragging us down with her constant pathetic drama. I stared at my mother's message. Ugly duckling dropout. It was a nickname she used to use when I refused to follow her strict superficial life plan, when I chose a quiet, honest career instead of chasing empty corporate titles. I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection. I just felt a profound, heavy pity for a woman who measured her own worth by tearing down her child. Then Kiara chimed into the group chat. My African-American sister-in-law had clearly had too much champagne. Her messages were erratic, full of typos, but the vicious intent was crystal clear. She sent a laughing emoji. She is probably sitting in some cheap county hospital right now, eating terrible vending machine food. Kiara mocked, referring to the terrifying medical transfer she thought she had successfully orchestrated. I wonder if the county doctors even know what they are doing. Good luck paying that bill with your non-existent credit score, Hannah. Travis says hi, by the way. He is too busy signing multi-million-dollar deals to text the family failure. I read Kiara's cruel, heartless words while sitting in a state-of-the-art, highly funded pediatric recovery unit, protected by the full weight of the federal government. She thought she had condemned my 7-year-old daughter to a filthy, underfunded ward. She thought her husband's illegal automated denial algorithm had forced me into total financial ruin. She was celebrating the suffering she believed she had inflicted upon her own niece. The sheer terrifying lack of basic human empathy was staggering. I looked up from the screen and watched Lily breathe. Her small chest rose and fell steadily. She was completely safe from their greed. I looked back down at the glowing screen. The group chat continued to roll with messages between my parents, Olivia and DeAndre, all congratulating themselves on their immense newly acquired wealth. They were eagerly calculating their stock portfolios, discussing which luxury cars they were going to purchase on Monday morning, and planning extravagant European vacations. They were dividing up a fortune built entirely on the suffering of innocent, desperate families. They were swimming in an ocean of blood money, and they were incredibly proud of it. I glanced at the digital clock on the hospital wall. It read 10:50, 5 minutes left. I felt a strange electric calm wash over my entire body. I set the phone back down on the table and walked over to the large window overlooking the dark city streets. The traffic below was sparse, the red taillights of passing cars blurring into long glowing streaks. Somewhere out there in the cold night, a fleet of black federal vehicles was silently converging on the towering glass headquarters of Apex Care. Somewhere out there, armed agents were stepping into elevators, preparing to breach the executive boardrooms and secure the physical servers holding the fraudulent artificial intelligence algorithm. The trap had been set, the bait had been taken, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut. I thought about the painful journey that had brought me to this exact moment. I thought about the decades of emotional manipulation, the constant suffocating pressure to conform to my parents' toxic ideals, and the endless comparisons to my ruthless golden child brother. I thought about the moment DeAndre smugly informed me that he had illegally frozen my emergency bank accounts, weaponizing his professional authority to cut off my only lifeline. I thought about Thomas slapping me across the face in the private dining room, choosing a fraudulent stock ticker over the life of his own granddaughter. I had spent 32 years trying to find a tiny scrap of genuine love and acceptance in a family that was completely incapable of providing it. I had twisted myself into knots trying to be the good, reliable daughter, hoping that one day they would look at me with pride instead of utter disdain. But the truth was finally undeniable. They were empty, broken people who worshipped nothing but money and status. They were parasites feeding off the vulnerability of others, and tonight I was going to be the absolute end of their reign. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. The group chat was still active. DeAndre had just sent a message boasting about a high-profile investment property he was planning to secure using his insider stock earnings. My father Thomas replied with a toast to family loyalty and smart business. It was 10:54. I watched the seconds tick by on the digital display. 55, 56, 57, 58, 59. The clock struck 10:55. The time for silence was officially over. I tapped the text input field at the bottom of the screen. The keyboard popped up glowing brightly in the dim hospital room. My fingers hovered over the keys for a brief, heavy second. I did not type an angry paragraph. I did not type a long emotional explanation about how much they had hurt me. I did not demand an apology or try to make them understand the horrific consequences of their actions. They were completely beyond the reach of human reasoning or moral accountability. There was only one language they understood, and that was the sudden catastrophic destruction of their public image and their financial power. I took a deep, steadying breath, channeling every ounce of pain, betrayal, and fierce maternal protection into the digital keypad. I typed exactly 2 short sentences. I checked the spelling, ensuring the message was perfectly clear and absolutely direct. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for my command. I looked at Lily one last time, making a silent promise that she would never ever have to deal with the toxic poison of these people for the rest of her natural life. I looked back at the screen. I pressed the blue send button and watched the message appear at the very bottom of the chat thread. It read, "Turn on CNN, right now." Across the city, inside the penthouse suite of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of wealth. The celebration was insulated from the harsh realities outside. Travis stood near the center, adjusting his custom-tailored midnight blue suit perfectly. He held a crystal flute of champagne, laughing loudly at DeAndre. DeAndre, wearing a razor-sharp designer suit, was scrolling through his tablet, calculating returns on their newly acquired stock portfolios. Kiara was posing near the floral arrangements, demanding a photographer capture her best angles for social media. Her diamond earrings caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. Thomas and Brenda sat comfortably on a velvet sofa, looking out over the city skyline with expressions of absolute triumph. They believed they had conquered the world. They believed their blind investment in their golden child had secured their permanent place among the financial elite. Olivia was lounging on a chaise, holding up her new diamond tennis bracelet, completely unbothered that she tried to steal her sister's home just days prior. The air in the penthouse was saturated with greed and the illusion of corporate invincibility. They were actively celebrating a financial victory built entirely on discarded human lives. Suddenly, the chiming of notifications pierced the smooth jazz playing from the sound system. Everyone's phone buzzed simultaneously. The family group chat had just updated. Olivia picked up her device, expecting a congratulatory message. Instead, she saw the 2 short sentences I sent from the pediatric intensive care unit. Olivia let out a harsh, mocking scoff that drew the attention of the room. She tossed her phone onto the glass coffee table with a roll of her eyes. "It is Hannah," Olivia announced, her voice dripping with condescension and annoyance. "She is demanding attention again." Thomas frowned, irritated that the family failure was interrupting their evening. "What does she want now?" he asked, swirling the liquor. "Is she begging for a handout because the county hospital kicked her out?" Brenda let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "I told you we should have removed her from the group chat entirely," my mother stated. "She is incredibly toxic." "What did she even say?" Olivia grabbed a piece of caviar before answering. She wrote, "Turn on CNN, right now." Kiara stopped posing and let out a theatrical sigh. "She is probably trying to make us watch some depressing documentary about poor people to guilt-trip us," Kiara sneered, crossing her arms. "Tell her we are way too busy making millions to care about her pathetic issues." Travis, however, paused. He took a slow sip of his champagne, his eyes narrowing slightly. I knew my specific background as a medical data auditor. He knew I was not prone to empty, meaningless drama. He knew I operated with facts and undeniable proof. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of genuine curiosity crossed his face. He set his crystal flute down on a side table and walked over to the flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. Let us see what our desperate sister thinks is so incredibly important, Travis said, grabbing the remote. It will give us something new to laugh about before we order the second round of caviar. He pressed the small power button on the sleek device. The massive television screen flickered to life with a bright flash perfectly illuminating the darkened corner of the penthouse suite. The channel defaulted to a local sports broadcast, but Travis quickly navigated the menu and selected the national CNN newsfeed. The family continued to laugh and chatter, fully expecting to see a mundane news story. DeAndre was actively reviewing his offshore banking accounts on his tablet, completely unbothered by the interruption. Brenda was slowly fixing her bright red lipstick in a small compact mirror. But the moment the CNN broadcast materialized on the giant screen, the relaxed, celebratory atmosphere in the penthouse evaporated instantly. The screen was not showing a standard news desk. It was completely dominated by a glaring bright red breaking news banner that stretched across the bottom third of the television. The bold white text flashing across the red background read, FBI raids, Apex Care HQ, billion-dollar pediatric fraud scheme exposed. The sheer magnitude of those words hung in the air like a physical manifestation of a nightmare. Travis froze completely, the remote control slipping slightly in his suddenly damp palm. Kiara dropped her designer clutch, the heavy bag hitting the hardwood floor with a loud thud. Thomas and Brenda stopped breathing, their eyes locking onto the massive television screen in absolute horror. Olivia stood up from the chaise, her mouth hanging open as she tried to process the terrifying headline. The television broadcast immediately cut to live helicopter footage hovering directly over the corporate campus of Apex Care in the financial district. The live aerial footage was absolutely devastating. Dozens of black federal vehicles were swarming the meticulously landscaped corporate plaza. Armed agents wearing tactical gear and windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI were establishing a massive perimeter around the main glass entrance. The helicopter camera zoomed in, capturing a terrifying image. Federal agents were hauling massive cardboard boxes and entire server racks straight out of the building. They were loading the encrypted hardware directly into secure federal transport vans. Those were the exact servers holding the automated artificial intelligence algorithms. Those were the exact servers Travis thought were completely untouchable behind his expensive corporate firewalls. The seasoned CNN news anchor appeared in a split screen next to the live raid footage, her expression grave and professional. We are following a massive, developing story breaking late tonight out of the financial sector, the anchor announced, her voice echoing clearly through the paralyzed penthouse suite. Federal agents from the Department of Justice and the Cybercrimes Division have just executed a highly coordinated raid on the national headquarters of Apex Care mere hours after the company concluded its highly publicized initial public offering. The anchor looked directly into the camera, delivering the fatal blow. According to a federal indictment unsealed just moments ago, the company is accused of orchestrating a horrific billion-dollar fraud scheme. Authorities state the insurance giant deployed an illegal automated algorithm specifically designed to automatically deny life-saving pediatric surgeries across the country. The company allegedly branded these critical procedures for children as experimental to artificially slash operational costs and inflate their stock value ahead of today's market launch. DeAndre backed away from the television, his face draining of all color. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently as he tried to check the after-hours stock trading data. The news anchor continued speaking, dismantling their entire world. This federal intervention was triggered late last night, the anchor explained. A heroic whistleblower bypassed the internal security firewalls and provided federal prosecutors with the encrypted access logs and algorithm code. This individual handed over incontrovertible proof of the corporate scheme. The anchor paused before delivering the final strike. Authorities confirmed the digital footprints, authorizing this software lead directly to the highest levels of the Apex Care Executive Board. A top-level executive intimately involved in the recent public offering has been directly implicated in deploying the software. Federal warrants for immediate arrest are currently being executed. Travis stood paralyzed in the center of the suite. He reached blindly for the champagne flute he had set on the table. His fingers trembled so violently that he misjudged the distance. The glass tipped over the edge of the marble surface, It fell in slow motion and struck the floor. The glass shattered into tiny fragments. The crash of breaking glass shattered the stunned silence, acting as the catalyst for total panic. The absolute realization of everything crashed over them. Absolute uncontrolled chaos erupted in the penthouse. DeAndre stared at his mobile banking application, letting out a loud shout of pure panic. The after-hours stock price for Apex Care was plummeting at a catastrophic rate. The shares were utterly worthless. Their newly acquired fortune was evaporating into thin air before their very eyes. Kiara let out a terrified scream, grabbing her hair as she realized her public relations career and high society status were permanently destroyed. She was married to a man who was about to be federally indicted for slaughtering children for profit. Thomas clutched his chest, gasping for air as the reality set in. He had funneled his entire life savings, every single penny he and Brenda owned, into a massive federal fraud scheme. They were instantly entirely bankrupt. Brenda fell to her knees among the shattered glass, sobbing hysterically as she realized her golden child was going to federal prison. Travis backed away from the television, his eyes wide and filled with a stark, terrifying realization. He looked at his shaking hands, realizing that his own sister, the woman he had discarded and left to suffer in a hospital room, had just single-handedly burned his entire billionaire empire to the ground. The federal gears had finally crushed them all. Inside the sprawling penthouse suite, the deafening silence was broken only by the crisp, professional voice of the CNN news anchor. The live helicopter footage of the FBI raid at the Apex Care headquarters shrunk into a smaller box in the upper right corner of the television screen. The red breaking news banner flashed across the bottom, but the main image transitioned to the sleek, brightly lit studio. The anchor looked directly into the camera with absolute gravity. We now take you to an exclusive pre-recorded interview with the anonymous federal whistleblower who brought this massive corporate conspiracy to light. The anchor announced, her tone echoing off the marble walls of the hotel suite. This individual provided the Department of Justice with the encrypted files necessary to execute tonight's unprecedented federal raid. Our financial and legal correspondents have verified her identity as a senior medical data auditor who worked within the regional hospital networks affected by this scheme. Because she is currently under strict federal protection, she requested this interview be recorded earlier this evening from a secure location. Thomas grabbed the edge of the velvet sofa, his knuckles turning completely white. Brenda let out a strangled, terrified gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Travis stood completely frozen amidst the shattered glass of his champagne flute, his eyes wide and unblinking. Kiara stumbled backward, her expensive designer gown catching on the edge of the coffee table. DeAndre dropped his tablet onto the floor, the screen cracking instantly, while Olivia remained paralyzed on the chaise lounge. They all knew exactly what was coming. They knew the identity of the auditor. The television screen shifted from the news anchor to a stark professional backdrop, and then my face filled the massive flat screen. I did not look like the exhausted, terrified single mother who had begged them for a loan just 48 hours ago. I did not look like the family failure they had mocked and belittled for my entire life. I looked absolutely powerful. I was wearing a sharp-tailored black blazer, my hair pulled back into a sleek, commanding style. My posture was perfectly straight, and my eyes stared directly into the camera lens with cold, unwavering authority. I looked like a woman who had just single-handedly dismantled a corrupt billionaire empire. My voice resonated through the luxurious hotel suite, crisp and entirely devoid of fear. "My name is Hannah," I stated on national television, my tone commanding the absolute attention of every single viewer watching across the country. "I am a senior medical data auditor, and I am the individual who handed the raw encrypted server data over to federal prosecutors tonight. I am here to explain exactly how the executive board of Apex Care built their highly anticipated initial public offering on a foundation of deliberate, premeditated medical fraud." In the penthouse, Travis let out a guttural, choked sound. He reached up and loosened his silk tie, suddenly unable to breathe. Brenda began to shake violently, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Thomas's arm. They were forced to watch their ultimate nightmare unfold in high definition. The interviewer sitting across from me in the pre-recorded segment leaned forward. Hannah, the federal indictment alleges that this was not a simple billing error. Can you explain the exact mechanics of the algorithm that Apex Care deployed? I did not hesitate. I looked straight into the camera knowing exactly who was watching me right now. It was not an error, I explained smoothly, using my specialized professional expertise to break down the highly complex digital fraud into terms the entire nation could understand. 3 weeks ago, the executive leadership team at Apex Care manually authorized a system-wide override. They deployed a sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithm across their entire national network. This software was specifically programmed to target, intercept, and automatically deny high-cost medical claims. But it did not target all claims. It exclusively targeted pediatric patients. A collective gasp of horror could almost be felt radiating through the television screen as the magnitude of the crime was laid bare. The software was maliciously designed to look for life-saving surgeries, critical oncology treatments, and rare disease interventions for children. I continued, my voice steady and relentless. The moment a hospital submitted a pre-authorized claim for a sick child, the algorithm instantly branded the necessary procedure as experimental. It automatically generated a complete denial of coverage without any human medical review. By intercepting these massive claims, the company immediately blocked hospitals from receiving payment, shifting the entire financial burden directly onto desperate families in the middle of terrifying medical emergencies. The interviewer looked visibly disturbed by the sheer depravity of the scheme. And why would a major health insurance provider implement such a catastrophic, unethical system right before going public to artificially inflate their financial valuation? I answered without a single ounce of hesitation, delivering the fatal strike to Travis's corporate strategy. By automatically denying the most expensive pediatric procedures nationwide, Apex Care artificially slashed their operational expenditures by billions of dollars in record time. They presented Wall Street investors with a completely fraudulent portrait of unprecedented revenue growth. They sacrificed the lives of innocent children to create a massive artificial profit margin, ensuring their stock price would open at a record-breaking high today. They traded human lives for paper wealth. Inside the penthouse, absolute pandemonium began to take root. Kiara fell onto the velvet sofa, hyperventilating, as she realized her public relations career was permanently obliterated. She was married to the architect of a nationwide pediatric slaughter. There was no corporate spin doctor in the world who could recover from this. DeAndre was pacing frantically near the broken tablet, his hands clutching his head. His entire banking career, his elite status, his stolen real estate investments, everything was gone. Olivia began to sob loudly, realizing her new mansion and her diamond bracelets were purchased with dirty frozen funds. Thomas and Brenda sat in sheer, unadulterated horror as they watched their supposedly mediocre daughter completely dismantle their golden child's empire. They had mocked my career. They had called me a toxic failure. They had allowed DeAndre to freeze my emergency bank accounts, and they had proudly chosen stock options over the beating heart of their own granddaughter. Now they were watching the exact same daughter execute a flawless, highly coordinated federal takedown on the biggest news network in the world. The television broadcast shifted briefly to show the live stock ticker running across the bottom of the screen. The financial fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. The after-hours trading market was reacting to the federal raid and my televised confession in real time. The bright green arrow that had symbolized their incredible wealth just an hour ago had flipped to a violent, aggressive red. Apex Care's stock price was absolutely plummeting. It was dropping by tens, then 20s, then 50s. Billions of dollars in corporate valuation were evaporating into thin air with every single passing second. The camera cut back to my face for the final moments of the interview. "You handed over the encrypted access logs directly to the Department of Justice," the interviewer stated. "Does the raw data indicate exactly who authorized this algorithm?" "Yes," I replied, my eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering maternal protection. "The digital fingerprints are pristine. The routing codes bypass the lower-level administrators completely. The data proves that the algorithm was personally designed, approved, and implemented by the highest-ranking executives in the C-suite." The federal authorities currently possess the exact names, timestamps, and digital signatures required to secure convictions for every single board member involved in this conspiracy. Nobody is untouchable. The broadcast faded from my resolute face back to the live studio anchor. The anchor summarized the catastrophic market collapse, noting that federal agents were currently moving to apprehend the implicated executives. In the penthouse suite, the reality of my final statement crushed the remaining air out of the room. Travis fell to his knees amid the shattered champagne glass. His custom-tailored suit felt like a heavy prison uniform. The stock ticker at the bottom of the television screen hit zero. Trading for Apex Care was officially halted by the Federal Exchange Commission. The money was completely gone. The billionaire status was dead. The empire had officially burned to the ground. Thomas let out a loud, agonizing wail of pure despair, clutching his chest as he realized his entire life savings and retirement funds had just vanished. Brenda stared blankly at the screen, her mind completely unable to process the total destruction of her perfect family image. They were utterly, completely, and permanently ruined forever. I had finally finished the difficult job. They destroyed my trust, so I systematically destroyed their future. There would be no mercy, no salvation, and absolutely no escape. They chose to play a vicious game of greed, and they lost absolutely everything in one single spectacular night of televised federal justice. They chose to play a vicious game of greed, and they lost everything in one night of televised federal justice. The immediate aftermath was swift, brutal, and utterly silent on my end. I sat in the dim light of the pediatric intensive care unit, watching the glowing screen of my mobile phone. It had been sitting face down on the tray table next to Lily's bed, but now it vibrated so violently it threatened to rattle off the edge. I picked it up and stared at the incoming call screen. The name flashing in bright white letters was Travis. He was calling me. The newly minted billionaire who had haughtily told me the corporate world was about survival of the fittest was now desperately trying to reach the sister he'd discarded. I watched his name flash for a few seconds. I felt no urge to answer. I felt no desire to scream at him or demand an apology. I simply pressed the red button and sent his frantic call directly to voicemail. 2 seconds later, the phone lit up again. This time it was my mother, Brenda. The woman who proudly called me an ugly duckling dropout and screamed that I was a toxic failure was now dialing my number with absolute terror. I sent her to voicemail. Then came Thomas. My father, the man who slapped me in a high-end restaurant to defend a national fraud scheme, was begging for my attention. Sent to voicemail. Olivia called next, followed immediately by DeAndre. The notifications stacked up on my screen like a desperate digital avalanche. Missed call, missed call, missed call. They were drowning in the catastrophic consequences of their own actions, reaching out for the only lifeline they thought they had left. But the line was completely dead. I turned the device entirely off and placed it safely back into my canvas tote bag. My job was done. Across the city, the atmosphere inside the Waldorf Astoria penthouse suite had devolved into absolute unfiltered chaos. The lavish celebration had transformed into a luxurious prison. DeAndre stood frozen near the shattered remains of Travis's champagne glass. The arrogant bank manager who gleefully used his financial authority to freeze my emergency accounts was staring at his ringing phone. The caller identification displayed the name of the regional director for his prominent wealth management bank. DeAndre's hands shook uncontrollably as he answered the call, his deep voice cracking as he greeted his superior. The conversation was incredibly brief and overwhelmingly devastating. DeAndre's boss did not call to ask for an explanation. He called to deliver an immediate, non-negotiable termination. Federal investigators had already contacted the banking headquarters. They had flagged DeAndre's personal accounts for severe insider trading violations connected directly to the Apex Care initial public offering. Furthermore, agents had uncovered the malicious digital trail DeAndre left when he illegally accessed my private banking data to artificially crash my property value. The regional director coldly informed DeAndre that his banking licenses were permanently suspended. His corporate accounts were completely frozen, and federal authorities would be arriving at his office by morning to seize his hard drives. DeAndre dropped his phone. The device hit the hardwood floor, cracking the screen just like the tablet he had dropped earlier. He collapsed onto the velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. He was facing massive federal prison sentences for credit manipulation and insider trading. The affluent, predatory lifestyle he had built by crushing vulnerable people was entirely destroyed. Across the suite, Kiara was locked in a frantic losing battle against the internet. The African-American public relations director was frantically swiping at her designer smartphone, her manicured nails aggressively tapping the screen. She was desperately trying to delete the dozens of live broadcast photos and boastful posts she had uploaded to her social media accounts throughout the evening. She wanted to erase the evidence of her celebrating the fraudulent fortune. But the internet is forever, and her reputation was already reduced to ashes. Angry investors, journalists, and outraged citizens had already screen-recorded her videos. Her social media feeds were overflowing with thousands of furious comments. People tagged her in screenshots of my interview, demanding to know how she could wear millions in diamonds while her husband denied life-saving surgeries to dying children. Her phone began ringing with calls from her wealthy high society friends, elite board members, and prominent media contacts. None of them were calling to offer their support. They were calling to aggressively distance themselves from her toxic brand. Kiara let out a loud, hysterical sob, pulling at her perfectly styled hair. The flawless, powerful image she had spent her entire adult life cultivating was replaced by the horrific reality of being a corporate monster. She would be forever known as the woman who drank expensive champagne while innocent children suffered. Her career in public relations was permanently, irrevocably dead. While Kiara and DeAndre spiraled into professional ruin, Thomas and Brenda were experiencing a complete, devastating financial execution. My parents sat completely paralyzed on the expensive sofa, staring blankly at the television screen. The CNN broadcast was displaying the continuous catastrophic drop of the Apex Care stock price in the after-hours trading market. The bright red numbers plummeted with ruthless speed. Thomas had bet his entire life on his golden child. He and Brenda had liquidated their entire stock portfolio, sold off their secure mutual funds, and drained their massive retirement accounts to purchase maximum shares of Apex Care before the initial public offering. They had placed all their trust in Travis, believing his ruthless corporate strategies made him a brilliant business genius. They had mocked my honest auditing career, claiming I did not understand how real wealth was generated. Now, they were watching their real wealth evaporate into absolute nothingness. The federal raid and my whistleblower testimony had triggered a massive investor panic. Major institutional shareholders were dumping the stock at an unprecedented rate. The value of the company dropped to zero, and trading was officially halted by federal regulators. Thomas clutched his chest, struggling to pull oxygen into his lungs. The sprawling suburban estate, the luxury vehicles, the country club memberships, and the comfortable elite retirement they had envisioned were instantly gone. They had traded their morals, their basic humanity, and the life of their own granddaughter for a pile of digital money that no longer existed. They were officially completely bankrupt. They had absolutely zero financial resources left to their name. Travis stood alone in the center of the lavish suite, surrounded by the total destruction of his family. The 35-year-old executive looked like a hollow, empty shell of a man. He stared at the television screen, watching the live helicopter footage of federal agents carrying heavy boxes of evidence out of his own corporate headquarters. The undeniable proof of his artificial intelligence algorithm, the precise coding he had personally authorized to automatically deny pediatric surgeries, was currently sitting in secure federal custody. He could not charm his way out of this. He could not use corporate lawyers to spin the narrative. The federal prosecutors had pristine raw data, and they had my detailed, highly technical testimony outlining his exact crimes. A loud, authoritative pounding suddenly echoed through the penthouse. The heavy, polished oak doors of the Waldorf Astoria suite shuddered under the force of the knocking. The noise cut through the sounds of Brenda's hysterical sobbing and Kiara's frantic crying. Nobody moved to answer the door. Travis stared at the heavy wood, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. The door violently burst open. A tactical team of armed federal agents flooded into the luxurious penthouse suite, their dark windbreakers, a stark contrast to the white orchids and elegant decor. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern expression, walked directly toward the center of the room. He did not look at the lavish spread of caviar or the spilled champagne. His eyes locked entirely onto my brother. Travis the agent announced, his voice carrying the full, unyielding weight of the federal government. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit national healthcare fraud, massive wire fraud, and severe violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Travis did not try to run. He did not fight back. He slowly raised his hands, submitting to the inevitable consequences of his greed. The federal agent stepped forward and aggressively pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly over the sounds of his crumbling family. The golden child, the incoming billionaire, the man who believed he was an untouchable king, was roughly escorted out of the penthouse in absolute disgrace. The empire was gone. I sat in the quiet, peaceful hospital room, holding my daughter's warm hand. The toxic nightmare was finally over. I had burned their corrupt world to the ground, and I was completely at peace. I sat in the quiet, peaceful hospital room, holding my daughter's warm hand. The toxic nightmare was finally over. I had burned their corrupt world to the ground, and I was completely at peace. One entire month had successfully passed since that spectacular night of absolute federal reckoning. My former golden child brother was currently sitting in a maximum security federal prison facility, awaiting trial. Federal prosecutors had successfully argued that a man with access to offshore corporate accounts was a massive flight risk, so the federal judge had firmly and officially denied his bail. Travis had traded his custom-tailored midnight blue suits and expensive champagne for a cheap bright orange jumpsuit and cold heavy metal bars. The billionaire empire he had built by signing automated death warrants for innocent children had completely evaporated. The ruthless executive who once proudly proclaimed survival of the fittest was now permanently trapped. The fallout for the rest of my toxic relatives was equally catastrophic. DeAndre, my arrogant brother-in-law, had been stripped of his prestigious banking credentials. Federal agents had frozen every single one of his financial assets pending their ongoing investigation into his illegal credit manipulation and blatant insider trading. He and Olivia were currently facing immediate aggressive foreclosure on their properties. Olivia had been forced to surrender her brand-new diamond tennis bracelet and her luxury vehicles to federal authorities as proceeds of criminal activity. They were entirely destitute, scrambling to find cheap rental apartments with zero income and completely destroyed credit scores. DeAndre could no longer use his banking authority to intimidate vulnerable people. Olivia could no longer sneer at my modest lifestyle while leeching off stolen money. Their carefully curated, high society image was permanently annihilated. They were paying the ultimate price for their extreme, unbridled greed. But the most spectacular total ruin belonged exclusively to my parents. Thomas and Brenda had blindly poured their entire life savings, their extensive mutual funds, and their massive retirement accounts directly into the Apex Care stock. When the Federal Exchange Commission permanently halted trading and the company collapsed into total bankruptcy, my parents lost absolutely everything they owned in a matter of seconds. The sprawling suburban mansion in the elite gated community was seized by creditors. Their luxury lifestyle, built entirely on their endless vanity and their absolute belief in Travis's supremacy, vanished into thin air. They were suddenly forced to move into a tiny, dilapidated motel on the outskirts of the city. The people who had ruthlessly mocked my career and slapped me for telling the truth were now entirely reliant on food banks and charity. They had traded their humanity for paper wealth, and they were left utterly destitute. During this exact same month, my own life had transformed in a way none of them could have ever predicted. The federal prosecutors had moved swiftly to process my case. Under the strict provisions of the Federal Whistleblower Protection Act, individuals who expose massive corporate fraud against the government are entitled to a percentage of the recovered funds. Because the Apex Care pediatric denial scheme involved billions of dollars in illegal fraudulent activity, my official whistleblower reward was astronomical. The federal government had officially deposited a multi-million-dollar reward directly into my secure, fully protected bank accounts. I was now independently wealthy beyond anything my parents had ever hoped to achieve. The official press release detailing the federal payout had hit the financial news networks earlier that morning. I knew it was only a matter of time before my desperate, bankrupt parents saw the headline and realized I held fortunes. It was a bright, sunny Tuesday morning when the inevitable confrontation finally occurred. I was walking through the expansive, brightly lit main lobby of the hospital. Lily had just finished a routine, highly successful follow-up appointment with her pediatric cardiologist. Her tiny heart was healing beautifully, and she was currently resting comfortably upstairs with a kind nurse while I went down to the lobby pharmacy to collect her new prescription medications. I was wearing a comfortable sweater and holding a warm cup of coffee, feeling completely relaxed and entirely secure in my new reality. As I turned away from the pharmacy counter, a sudden frantic commotion near the automatic sliding glass doors caught my immediate attention. Two people were aggressively pushing past the hospital security guards, their eyes darting wildly around the crowded lobby. It took me a full 5 seconds to even recognize them in the busy environment. Thomas and Brenda looked absolutely horrific. My mother, who previously refused to leave her mansion without perfect hair and expensive red lipstick, was wearing a wrinkled, stained coat. Her hair was unkempt, and her face was deeply lined with sheer exhaustion and total panic. My father looked 10 years older, his posture stooped and his shoulders entirely defeated. He was wearing a faded jacket, his shoes scuffed and dirty. The arrogant, untouchable couple who had proudly chosen paper wealth over the life of their own granddaughter had been reduced to pathetic, desperate shells. Brenda spotted me standing near the pharmacy. Her eyes widened and she let out a loud, hysterical gasp. She grabbed Thomas by the arm and began sprinting across the polished linoleum floor, completely ignoring the confused stares of the doctors, nurses, and patients passing by. "Hannah!" My mother screamed loudly, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated desperation. "Hannah, please wait. Please do not walk away from us." I did not run. I did not hide. I simply stood my ground, holding my coffee cup, and watched them approach with absolute chilling indifference. The panic that used to grip my chest whenever they raised their voices was completely gone. They had absolutely no power over me anymore. They were just two strangers who had made a horrific, unforgivable choice. Thomas and Brenda reached me gasping for air. The moment they stopped in front of me, they did something I never ever thought I would witness in my entire life. My proud, arrogant, status-obsessed parents completely collapsed. They fell hard onto their knees right there on the cold, hard linoleum floor of the hospital lobby. Brenda reached out with trembling, desperate hands trying to grab the fabric of my sweater. I took a smooth, deliberate step backward instantly. I kept myself entirely out of her reach. "Hannah, please." Brenda sobbed hysterically, tears streaming down her unwashed face. "We saw the news this morning. We saw the federal reward money. You have millions of dollars now. We lost everything. The bank took the house. We have no food. We have nowhere to go. You have to help us. Please, you have to save us." Thomas looked up at me from his knees, his eyes wide and pleading. He clasped his hands together in a pathetic, desperate begging motion. "We made a terrible mistake." "Hannah," my father cried out, his voice shaking with absolute terror. "We were blinded by Travis and his lies. We were wrong to trust him. But we are still your parents. We are your blood. You cannot just leave us to rot on the street. Family loyalty has to mean something. Please, we are begging now. We are begging you for a second chance. Just give us a fraction of that reward money so we can survive." I stared down at them. Family loyalty. The sheer blinding hypocrisy of those two words coming from their mouths was staggering. They dared to weaponize family loyalty after they had proudly watched DeAndre illegally freeze my emergency bank accounts. They dared to ask for my financial salvation after they had violently slapped my face for exposing a corporate algorithm that was actively slaughtering children. They were not begging because they felt remorse for what they did to Lily. They were begging because they were hungry, broke, and entirely out of options. I did not yell at them. I did not create a dramatic scene. My expression remained completely blank, devoid of any sympathy, anger, or warmth. I reached calmly into my canvas tote bag without saying a single word. I kept one specific document with me every day since this nightmare began. It was a reminder of exactly who these people were and what they valued. I pulled the white paper out of my bag and unfolded it slowly. It was the original hospital billing document, the exact insurance claim displaying the massive red denial stamp. The paper that declared I owed $150,000 in cash for my daughter's life-saving surgery. The document, my family told me, was simply a routine measure. I looked down at Thomas and Brenda, still kneeling on the hospital floor, staring at me with pathetic, tear-filled eyes. I extended my arm and let the paper flutter onto the linoleum. "You told me to handle it," I stated, my voice cold and terrifyingly final. I handled it. I turned my back and walked away, leaving them sobbing upon the floor. I did not look back as I walked down the long hospital corridor. The sound of my parents crying echoed briefly against the hard walls, but the noise quickly faded into absolute nothingness. For 32 years, their voices had dictated every aspect of my self-worth. They had constantly demanded perfection, manufactured endless guilt, and punished me whenever I failed to worship their golden child. I had spent my entire life starving for a single ounce of their genuine approval. I had twisted myself into knots trying to prove that my honest career and my quiet life were valuable. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, they would finally love me. But as I listened to their desperate tears fade away, I felt a profound, incredible weight lift completely off my shoulders. I finally understood that being their scapegoat was never a reflection of my actual flaws. It was a reflection of their deep, irreversible brokenness. My true strength did not come from destroying their corrupt empire. My true strength came from the exact moment I simply stopped caring about their validation. They were officially strangers to me now. The toxic ties that had suffocated me since childhood were permanently severed, and for the very first time in my life, I felt entirely at peace with my own decisions today. I walked forward with a completely clear mind, knowing that I would never again compromise my boundaries to keep cruel people comfortable. The long nightmare was finally over, and my new reality was just beginning. I made my way directly to the main hospital billing department. The waiting area was empty, and the same administrator who had handed me the devastating denial notice weeks ago was sitting quietly behind her desk. She looked up and smiled warmly when she saw me approaching. The federal injunction had protected Lily during the investigation, but the original balance for her open-heart surgery was still officially pending on the hospital ledger. I walked up to the counter and pulled out a crisp, heavy cashier check that my new wealth management team had prepared for me earlier this morning. It was made out for exactly $150,000. I slid the thick paper across the counter. The administrator looked at the massive number, her eyes widening in pure shock. "I told you I would handle it," I said, offering her a genuine, relaxed smile. "Please apply this to my daughter's account immediately and clear her balance in full." The administrator typed rapidly into her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within seconds, the terrifying red numbers on the screen vanished, replaced by a beautiful glowing zero. The crushing debt that Travis and Kiara had tried to use to destroy my life was completely erased. I owned my daughter's survival, and I owed my family absolutely nothing. But simply paying my own bill was not enough to satisfy the deep sense of justice I felt. The whistleblower reward the federal government had deposited into my accounts was astronomical. It was more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. I had spent days thinking about how to use that massive fortune. I remembered the sheer terror I felt when I thought I was going to lose my child to corporate greed. I knew there were thousands of other families out there sitting in cold hospital waiting rooms holding denied insurance claims, feeling completely powerless against billionaire executives. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my legal team. The lead attorney answered on the first ring. I gave him the green light to initiate our new project. We officially established a massive legal defense fund dedicated entirely to helping desperate families fight corrupt insurance denials. I allocated $20 million of my federal reward money to hire the most aggressive, ruthless healthcare attorneys in the country. If any insurance company ever tried to deploy an automated algorithm to deny life-saving care to a sick child, my legal team would immediately destroy them in federal court. I was turning my traumatic experience into an absolute nightmare for every corrupt medical executive in the nation. Travis thought he was building an empire by denying care, but I was building a heavily funded fortress to guarantee that no family would ever face that terror again. With the financial and legal matters permanently settled, I took the elevator back up to the pediatric recovery ward. The sterile smell of the hospital no longer brought me anxiety. It just smelled like healing. I walked into Lily's room. The heavy cardiac monitors that had surrounded her bed for a month were completely gone. The thick white bandages on her chest had been removed, leaving a neat healing scar that proved she was a fierce survivor. She was sitting up in bed, swinging her legs happily over the edge of the mattress. She was wearing her favorite bright yellow sundress, and her fingernails still sparkled with the ocean blue and pink glitter polish we had applied on the morning the federal raid happened. "Are we really going home today, Mommy?" she asked, her voice bright and full of vibrant energy. "Yes, my brave girl," I answered, grabbing her small canvas duffel bag to pack her few remaining items. "We are going home right now. And we never have to worry about anything bad ever again." I packed her favorite storybooks, the small stuffed bear she held during her recovery, and the colorful drawings she had made for the nursing staff. The nurses gathered around the doorway to say their emotional goodbyes. They had protected us when my family tried to throw us to the wolves, and I made a mental note to cater a massive, expensive lunch for the entire pediatric ward tomorrow. I took Lily's small, warm hand in mine. Her grip was strong and steady. Her tiny heart was pumping perfectly, completely fixed and ready for a long, beautiful life. We walked out of the hospital room together. We passed the exact spot in the hallway where DeAndre and Olivia had tried to steal my condominium for 30% of its value. We passed the small plastic tray table where Kiara had thrown a pathetic $5,000 bribe at me. The ghosts of their cruelty lingered in the air, but they held absolutely no power over me anymore. They were locked in prison cells and bankrupt motels, utterly consumed by the bitter consequences of their own unbridled greed. I felt a tremendous surge of pride as we reached the elevator. I had not just survived their abuse. I had actively dismantled the system that allowed them to thrive. I had protected my child, secured our future, and exposed a national fraud scheme that would save countless innocent lives. The elevator doors slid open, and we rode down to the main floor. The lobby was completely clear. Thomas and Brenda were long gone, presumably wandering back to whatever miserable reality awaited them. I did not spare a single thought for their current suffering. They had dug their own graves, and I was perfectly content to let them lie in the dirt. We walked through the automatic sliding glass doors and stepped completely out of the hospital. The bright sunlight hit my face as we stepped onto the pavement. The air felt incredibly fresh, crisp, and clean. The dark clouds that had hung over my life were finally gone. I looked down at Lily. She tilted her head up toward the clear blue sky, closing her eyes and letting the warm sunlight wash over her healing face. A brilliant, joyful smile spread across her lips. Seeing her healthy and completely safe filled my soul with a level of happiness I had never experienced before. I squeezed her tiny hand, feeling the incredible strength of the new life we were about to begin together. We were walking into a future entirely free of toxic conditions, free of cruel comparisons, and completely free of fear. I learned the hardest lesson a person can ever learn, but it saved us both. Sometimes the only way to protect the people you truly love is to burn the bridge to the people who share your blood. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick, and you cannot save people who are actively trying to drown you. Letting go of the biological title of family was the most terrifying thing I ever did, but it was also the most rewarding. It cleared the path for genuine peace. I built a beautiful, secure world from the ashes of their destruction, and I did it completely on my own terms. I know there are others out there fighting these same silent, agonizing battles behind closed doors. I know how hard it is to walk away. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below.